You'll be opening your hips and stretching your groin with this yin yoga routine. These 5 poses combined will help you to internally and externally rotate your hips. You'll focus on your adductor and abductor muscle groups. You'll also stretch your hip flexors and your quads. So by the end of this session, you will have more flexible, happier hips. You might need a yoga block or 2, so grab those if you have them at home. And if you don't have yoga blocks, you can always use a cushion or a pillow instead. So get whatever you might need, and then we'll meet back here on the mat. Our first hip opener is Dragon Pose. This is a really nice stretch for your quads and your hip flexors. So to come into Dragon Pose, you can have your hands towards the front of the mat and then step your right foot forward in between your hands. Your back knee might slide back slightly, and you can keep your toes tucked at the back to support the knee a little bit more, or if it feels good, you can bring the top of your foot to the mat. If you're using yoga blocks today, you can rest your hands on blocks. We'll hang out here for a few breaths in Baby Dragon. So you might start to feel that sensation within your back hip flexor and maybe your back quad. We'll be here for 5 minutes in total, so choose a version of this pose which feels sustainable for you. You might be happy to stay here, you might be feeling it enough, but if you want to go a little bit deeper, you can now walk your right foot to the outside of your right hand, having those toes pointed away from you if that feels good for you. An option to go deeper again would be to bring your forearms down onto the blocks or onto the yoga mat. Remember, as long as you're feeling the stretch, you're doing the pose correctly. You should never feel as though you're forcing anything or pushing too deep into any yin yoga pose. So if you have gone a bit deeper, you will know in your heart and soul if your body is not able for it. And don't feel bad about coming back out to a shallower level. That's absolutely encouraged if that's what you need. The goal of yin yoga is not to empty your mind or stop your thoughts, because that is completely impossible for most of us. The goal is just to observe your thoughts, notice when you're getting carried away, and when and if you are, just coming back to your breath or back to focusing on the sensations you feel within your body. And we'll be here for 2 minutes. I'll leave you in complete silence now, and then I'll let you know when it's time to release. From Dragon Pose, we'll be coming straight into Sleeping Swan. You can take your time getting there. If you are using blocks, just slide them to the front of your mat. And now your right foot is going to slowly make its way over to the left side of the mat. When it's there, you can drop that right knee onto the mat in front of you. Maybe adjusting this back knee if you need to. So there's no real right or wrong with the position of your right foot. I have mine way back closer to my body. Some of you might be able to bring it a little bit further away. But just being really mindful of this right knee and keeping your right foot flexed to help to protect it. Your back foot is gently pressing into the mat. Now you can stay here. We're getting a nice stretch into this right glute. We're also getting a nice external rotation for the right hip. But if you do want to go a little bit deeper, you can keep your weight in your hips and then just bring your forearms down onto the mat. You can stay here, or you might rest your forehead onto a yoga block if you have one, or maybe it can come to rest on your hands. We'll be here for 5 minutes. Take a moment or two to fidget and wiggle and get yourself comfortable. And then just try to commit to stillness within this pose. Directing your awareness to the sensations you're feeling within your body. Also keeping your awareness riding your breath. If throughout this pose you feel as though your leg is falling asleep, if you're having pins and needles, you can place yoga blocks or cushions in underneath your hips just to help prop them up a little bit. Otherwise, we'll be here for 1 more minute. In a moment, we'll make our way back into downward facing dog. There's no rush to get there. Just start to reverse out of swan. Bring your back toes onto the mat. Lift your back knee and then step your right foot back. You can just paddle your feet, stretch your legs, sway your hips from side to side. Or you might just enjoy some stillness here in downward dog. And once you're ready, you can bring both knees back down onto your mat, sitting in a way that feels comfortable on the yoga mat for you. We'll just be here for a few breaths, maybe with the eyes closed. Bringing the awareness down into the hips and noticing if you feel anything different within the 2 sides of your hips. And once you're ready to do so, we'll repeat dragon pose now with the left foot forward. So the foot might start in between the hands and it might stay there. Back knee can come back. Back toes are tucked or the top of the foot is on the mat. Hands may or may not be on yoga blocks. Bringing the awareness this time into the right hip flexor, the right quad. And just seeing if your body is inviting you to go a bit deeper. If it is, you can bring that left foot to the outside of the left hand. Toes may be spilling off of the mat. And then again, if you do get that invitation to go past this edge, you might be able to come down onto your forearms. Wherever you are is absolutely perfect. Just try find your stillness, find your breath, find some sensations to keep you anchored here in this pose. You can make your way slowly towards Swan pose now. Wherever you feel that sensation and stretch within your left glute, that's where the pose is working for you. And then you can stay here in Swan, or if you do want to go deeper, you can gradually come down onto your forearms. Head can float, or it can rest on a yoga block or on the floor. Staying here for 5 minutes if you can. Allowing gravity to open up your hips. And just using your breath to assist it by finding those tight little spots and sending some fresh oxygen into them. Left foot remains gently flexed. The top of your back foot is gently pressing into the mat. So you're ever so slightly maintaining a little bit of activity within your feet. Time for us to release Swan pose. This time we'll just make our way back to sit on the mat. Really taking your time, big as here if you need to. You can sit with your legs out long in front of you, and we'll just release those poses with some windshield wipers. So you're leaning back on your hands, feet are wide apart. Slowly drop your knees from side to side. And if it feels good to pause, feel free to do that. Once you feel satisfied that you've released most of the pose, you can just come into a seat again on the mat. Closing the eyes and pausing. Feeling all that you feel within your hips and maybe in some other parts of your body as well. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Our next pose is butterfly pose. We'll be sitting on the mat, so if your hips feel tight, you can elevate them by sitting on a yoga block or a cushion. Then you can bring the soles of your feet together. Now, the closer you have your feet to your groin, the more of a stretch you're going to get for your adductor muscles. But of course, listen to your body and do what's best for you. Knees might be up in the air, that's totally normal. Don't try to force them down. You might tilt or shift your hips a little bit so they're not rotating backwards. Make sure your pelvis is rotating forwards. And you can stay here with your spine straight, or you can gently fold forward, maybe dropping your head. We'll be here in butterfly pose for 5 minutes. Once again, gravity and your breath are doing all of the work. All you have to do is try your best to find stillness, both in your body and your mind. And each time you drift off or you get fidgety, just training yourself to come back to that one thing that keeps you present. If throughout this hold your head and shoulders start to get heavy, you can always bring your elbows onto your legs and then rest your forehead into your hands. Or if you have yoga blocks, you might be able to make a little tower with your blocks and then rest your forehead on those. Your fingertips can come back to the floor now, and then slowly push yourself away from the ground. When you're there, you can ask your knees to come back together. And we'll release butterfly pose with some windshield wipers. You might also take a moment just to straighten out the legs. Maybe stretch through the backs of your legs. Circle your ankles, stretch out your toes. Our next pose is squat pose. So this will bring your focus to the abductor muscles on the outsides of your thighs. Also a really nice hip opener, stretches the groin. It can be quite intense, so if you feel that, don't worry, you can either shorten your hold time, you can sit up on yoga blocks, or if squat pose is just inaccessible to you, that's okay. You can come into a wide leg child's pose on your mat, or you can do happy baby pose. You're making the same shape with your body, but you're just putting a little bit less pressure into your legs that way. So if you are coming into squat pose, you can bring your feet onto the mat, having them wide apart. Toes point away from you, and it's okay if your ankles, or your heels rather, are up off of the ground. If you need to, you can always fold your yoga mat to create a little bit of a platform for the heels. And then your elbows come in between your knees, palms find each other, and the elbows might ever so gently press the knees away from each other. We're going to hold here for 2 minutes if we can, and if we can't, don't worry, you can always work up to those longer holds. Find your breath. Find your anchoring sensations. And now just drop into the stillness of this pose, physically and mentally. You can come out of the pose now, however feels most natural to do so. And then come to find a seat. Pausing and feeling the reverberation of squat pose now. The last pose in this routine is deer pose. Deer pose provides a really nice internal and external rotation for your hips at the same time. So you might take a yoga block or a cushion and elevate your hips by sitting up on it. Then we're coming into a very brief butterfly pose. From here, bring your right foot back behind you, so it's back behind your hips. Now, it may or may not be at a right angle. Don't worry too much about that. Just bring your foot to the point where you can still keep your right seat bone pressed into the yoga block or into the mat if you're just sitting on the floor. Now, your left foot will come in line with your right knee. If this left knee feels a little bit unsupported up in the air like this, you can have a yoga block in underneath it. So this is a very subtle pose, but it can feel really nice, especially in this right hip joint. Now, if you were to see this pose in a yoga book, the model might have both of their legs at a 45-degree angle. But I find for most people, myself included, as soon as we try to bring this right leg back to a 45-degree angle, the seat bone just pops up off of the floor. So you might be able to experiment a little bit. Maybe you can get this back knee back to that 45-degree angle with your leg, but if you can't, don't worry too much. Now we're just using this pose as a little counter pose for everything we've done today. So we're just going to be here for the next minute. Keeping your weight balanced, making sure you're not tipping away too much from that right seat bone. Finding your breath. Dropping all your awareness down into your hips. And now you can release to your pose by straightening up both legs, having them in front of you, shaking them off a little bit. We'll repeat on the opposite side now. So back to that brief butterfly pose. This time your left foot comes back behind the hip. Right foot comes in line with the left knee, if it can. Both of our seat bones are pressing into our block or the floor. This time the tendency will be to lean away from the left seat bone, so just try to keep it grounded. We'll hold here for 1 minute. Now you can release to your pose. Both legs back out in front of you. You can remove the block or cushion from underneath yourself. Lean back on your hands and then do some windshield wipers. You can of course release the pose in whatever way your body is craving. If you enjoyed this routine, I'd be really grateful if you could leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so we can practice again together in the future. If you have time, I'd definitely recommend for you to lie down on your mat in corpse pose and just let your body absorb all of the poses that we've done. I do have a 10-minute guided relaxation. If you would like to do that, feel free to click into it now. Once you feel as though you have released most of the pose, you can come back to a seat. We'll take a few breaths just to pause and observe how the body is feeling. So you might close your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me for this hip flexibility routine. I'll see you on the mat again soon, but until then, take good care of yourself and goodbye.